Alright, hell yeah. So Solo Boater R1 wants to know about foot cups and my take on them. You know what I mean? How to lock in your feet. And I have a lot to say about this. So alright, here we go. Alright, hell yeah. We're going to try to burn through this. But I have used foot cups, not for R1ing, but just in normal 14-foot rafts, for whitewater. And hell yeah, so my breakdown on the physics is that foot cups work good if your foot is being, if you can leverage upward on your toes. That's kind of my take-home point of what a foot cup is going to do. Kind of grips you to the boat in that way. But I think it's always a disadvantage when you get thrown to one position and then you still have your foot twisted up in that foot cup. It's never like, oh, I can just pull myself back into that position. No, it's like you're just fighting to get your foot undone. And it can torque your ankles and stuff. So this is the same issue that current round boats have. In my round boat, especially the NRS, the inflated floor is so thick and pushed up that it makes a huge pocket on the sides for my foot to get stuck in. And then even just getting your foot stuck underneath the thwarts. I had my whole leg go underneath the thwart and then flip over, and I was stuck under there. I was able to get a pocket of air, but it really took me, to hold my breath, go underwater, get straightened out, and then push myself free. So that was kind of a little bit, that doesn't need to be that way at all. So that's where, even round boats aren't designed for R1 in mind. Or even just the safety of people's, feet getting wedged under thwarts. That's the scariest thing about actually commercial rafts, is some people just get totally wedged underneath the thwarts. Okay, so, and my biggest issue is between the seam and the main tube of the floor. In the NRS, we mentioned that. That's where even like, like the Sotar Merlin, I'll say good things, always good things about that, because hell yeah, Sotar and RMR are the first companies to actually make boats for R1. Now, I think they're making boats for R2, except for Sotar, but definitely, RMR knows that Thundercloud is being R1'd. Now, like, what's the future? Are they actually, taking R1ers into consideration and being like, hey, what do you want? No, that's why I'm making these videos. All right, so my solution for my boat was to glue the fabric to the floor. So this is going to be underneath the thwart. I glued fabric on the floor and then folded 3 inches up underneath the thwart, and then it came back out and then wrapped up the thwart and attached to the top. This is the discoloration you might see on my thwarts in some videos. This allows me to jam my foot just always in the perfect amount. It's always in the perfect spot, and I can jam it in anywhere underneath that thwart. It always goes in 3 to 4 inches. So check this out. So the shredder, there is no place to hook your feet in. You know what I mean? So all you have to do in the shredder types boats, is to get a 3 to 4, I don't even know what I'm saying, but anyway, just take that material and then, let's read this. The shredder has the best option to make, the shredder, because you don't have all the gaps that I mentioned that your foot can get just dangerously caught in. The shredder is a blank slate, the paddle cat is. It's a blank slate to be able to build something for your foot to always just capture 3 to 4 inches anywhere around that rectangle. And so, all right, so then I mentioned one solution that could be done right away. The shredder could glue that fabric just 3 to 4 inches underneath the current thwarts. If you glue it 3 to 4 inches underneath, then your foot can get wedged 3 to 4 inches deep. At the very end, I also said that you could actually take a strip of foam and then just jam it in there, so it had an opening. You know what I mean? So you had at least an inch wide gap for your foot to slide in easy and your foot to slide out easy. So this would allow the foot to slide into that pocket and have upward pressure on the thwart, as well as wedging in. So wedging in the side of my raft isn't good. Like, there's no place to actually just even hook my foot currently when I'm just and this is what I talk about later. In an R1 boat, I want the cockpit to be narrow enough to when I reach my feet over, I can hook them in the other side. And so this should be a benefit where actually, you should be able to get your foot in kind of quickly and easily and then be able to hook it up underneath. I think that would probably be the most primo. So the hooking of the foot is kind of what's going to be able to capture you and then pull you back in, keep you from falling out. I'm going to slow down right here because one thing that I try to do is high side my body, but then I just fall out because none of my lower body is locked in. So if I could high side my body all the way outside the boat, but then have my feet like hook in, on some piece of material, and maybe it is on the other side of the boat. Maybe, an R1 boat can be so small and narrow so that when I do an effective high side, just like a kayaker would high side outside of their kayak, my feet can be across the other side and hooked in. And then when I go high side, I can actually pull myself, you know what I mean? So it's just kind of one unit. That would be cool. So anyway, so I had to glue. So in my boat, just on the side where the floor meets, I had to glue more material in just so my foot wouldn't sink down in. The NRS floor, and we said that, it's such a deep pocket, my whole foot gets stuck. This is very dangerous, and even my glued strip is becoming unglued, and yeah, it's actually a hazard right now. Like when my foot does get trapped underneath there, now it's getting trapped underneath that glued strip, and it really worries me, so I need to fix that. Maybe just rip it all out. But this glued strip, I had to do this glued strip because you can't just put material underneath the thwart in a round boat, because I had to glue that corner. There would be nothing worse than getting your foot stuck in a hole that you're never going to get it pulled out of. So that is where the shredder type boats are just so safe, because they have this fabric cockpit where you can make, little depressions for your feet to get, what we're talking about, but there's no place where your foot can just go all the way through. So now you could just add a bunch of material to the cockpit of a round boat, but that is just adding potentially unnecessary weight. But I would like to see that. I would like to see the cockpit of a round boat have no place where your foot could slip under permanently. So my solution to the side of the raft is the same as under the thwarts. So even in my boat right now, I could even work on having a bump out of inflated material or foam, high density foam, that creates a 3 to 4 inch pocket to wedge your foot in. Now there are some design constraints here, because currently in my boat, when I'm sitting on the tube, I want my foot to be up against the tube. And then so if I put this bump out, my outside foot is now going to be pushed up against that, maybe wonky. So this also brings up the idea that, like someone should make an R1 boat that isn't air inflated, just to show that, hey, maybe this is what you want. Just like a kayak isn't air inflated, you have exactly what you want where you want it. And the inside cockpit of a R1 boat is one of those places where you're just like, yeah, what do we want? You know what I mean? And so, I want my tube to be in the same spot. I just want to reach my foot inside the inflated tube and reach a pocket. Like, obviously, you can't just take out a section of inflatable. All right, so a better design would be to have your foot on the side of a boat go in the same 3 to 4 inches and be able to hook into a void. As long as you can naturally, pull it out, push it in, like that's I think the ideal. That would be the most superior. I don't know if high density foam would be strong enough or could be welded good enough, but you know what I mean? That might be the material I kind of experiment, work with. Drop stitch material that can just be part of the boat makes the best, like rectangular corners. Because even in a paddle cat, that's what I was thinking. Just even have a strip of like 3-inch or 4-inch drop stitch material just all the way around, and then having your feet slide up into there, especially in the front and the rear. That would be the most ideal. Again, like I said, up against the side, it's going to hurt your ankle if you're having to actually like push, you know what I mean? So it's like that's where it needs to be kind of like up against the side. That's the hardest one to design, just because you don't want your outside foot, the foot up against that outer tube, to be like rubbing up against a sharp corner. Okay, so again, simple stuff like gluing fabric underneath the thwart of a paddle cat, that could solve the majority of the issue up front and in the back. You could then and again, that's where I say you could shove a strip of high density foam, leave an opening, foot slides in, slides out. Hell yeah. All right, we're almost done. So I will have to. I'm gonna review footage of how I shuffle around. That was the other question. Is just like how are you shuffling around? While the boat's spinning underneath me. One thing on this is like my mind is on the pile. So when you are surfing a pile, it has a higher side. Your boat is always trying to get kicked out. You know what I mean? Like watch footage of your boat like sliding from left to right. And then so I'm always trying to jump to that pile, be on that pile. And if I'm on that pile and my boat's spinning around, then I can just have the boat spin underneath me. So I think there is that aspect of like just being spatially aware of like where I am in the like on the pile and having the boat spin around me. But no, because I can actually do this shuffle move on my offside better. So I'm gonna go from my offside, have the boat spin, and then land on my offside again, do a 180. And on my strong side, it's actually harder for me to do this move, have the boat, and then move my body. So one thing I notice is I'm trying to paddle with more weight down on my feet, which allows me to, when I do this, I'm able to just move from one side to the other. So this is something you can practice. Just paddle on your strong side, put weight down on your feet, and then jump to your offside. And if you have more weight on your feet and you kind of treat like that motion like you're kind of in a squat, you can maybe I use the word explode. You can kind of explosively get to that other side. So just paddling on your strong side, jumping to your offside, paddling on that side, and then paddling back and forth. That's a good way to practice moving around the boat. I can do that in a lake, just always. That's a good practice. But I think even when surfing, I'm using this. I'm trying to put weight down on my feet and then rotate over my feet, still kind of being in a crouched position. And maybe I'll look at more footage of that. So here's my take-home point. So I've stopped using the traditional locked-in foot position that I see most R1ers use. Before going into rapids, my feet are way out to the side. So if here is the cockpit that's rectangular, my feet are kind of this direction, out front and out to the side. This is where I want a narrower cockpit. The boat doesn't have to be narrower, but the cockpit and my ability to, get my, toes underneath. And sometimes, check this out, like maybe my ankle is sideways, and I actually want to, brace my ankle, just under that. So maybe having a variety of little caves or depressions around that cockpit where I can slide in an ankle sideways, and I can also at the same time slide in my toes and then lock in. Okay, and I'll have to review my footage because I don't know why this is. It's either I'm just comfortable or I'm constantly shifting my position while doing this. And I can also make a video of when I am in this seated position, I'm not just on one hip. I'm on one hip and then the leg that is on the outer tube, that thigh. So that thigh is my flat spot. And so I'll make a separate video on that. But if you're out there R1ing, notice your thigh that's on your hip that you're sitting on, the thigh that's going into the boat on that outside tube. That is going to be your flat spot. So the more weight you push in on that thigh, the wider your flat spot gets. You know what I mean? Because when you are heavily leaning, you can't just lean on a hip. That's very unstable and it's very uncomfortable. So having that flat spot, so that's an addendum. All right, hell yeah. But as we talk about having a place to lock in the foot, I'll be loose. And I want to move around. Like we just talked about surfing, how I'm just letting the boat spin underneath me. There's a chance I don't need to be locked in. But then there's this, there's times where it's like, heck yeah, I want to be locked in right now. And I need to actually do this more, going through waves and waves holes, is to actually lock in, lean back, and then paddle, and then allow my weight in the boat to be one and kind of charge through and allow it to ride up through these waves. So yes, the lock-in is super important. Foot cups, those are going to be crazy to actually find. So this, having a continuous, in a rectangular cockpit or square cockpit, having continuous locations to lock your feet in. So that's what I would like. And I would like to be able to lock my feet in, so yeah, at every point around the cockpit equally. I think also that R1 cockpits could be narrower, and we talked about how the boat, so I'll just read this. So you can always reach your feet over to the other side and brace your feet and toes. The Fat Cat I found is too wide in the cockpit currently, even though there's no place to even wedge your feet in across. But the boat, this boat doesn't have to be narrower. It just means that the cockpit has to be, you know, the cockpit has to be smaller, you know, so that inflated portion of the cockpit narrower. And like even right now, this gives me the opportunity to actually craft a foam cockpit in the Fat Cat where I can actually put my feet underneath and have a void, but then when I'm just in my normal seated position, my inside leg up against that perimeter tube isn't, you know, is going to be hitting a flat spot and not some weird bump out, because I can make that seat go all the way. So if here is the outer tube, I can make the foam go out, you know, so I can extend the seat this way and then have it go down and then have that pocket in there. And I think we're at the point where there's no reason to have R1 have a cockpit where it's a rounded tube. You know what I mean? Because if you fall off this side, you're going to fall in. And then, you know, there might be benefit to have it rounded this side as you know, sink down in. But still, it could be very beneficial just to have, and that's what we're going to be working on with the Fat Cat, because I can, and I'll do that in a separate video, but actually making a cockpit that's out of foam, that has the perfect lips. You know, people want to see on the outside of the boat something swept up, so when you go lean on that, it's comfortable, and then you can like leverage the boat so the other side comes out of the water. All right, so hell yeah, this is long enough, and we got through it. That's my takeaway on FOOTCUPS. Don't like them, but I do want to be able to lock in at every point in an R1 boat. All right, hell yeah.